One of the most unpleasant encounters I've ever had happened, unexpectedly of course, in a crowded market in Unther. Little did I know, but the fruit punch I was drinking had been transported to the cliff-carved ancient merchant stalls with their brightly patterned cotton sheet awnings fluttering in the hot desert wind. The merchants selling the fruit punch were dwarven, dark-skinned gold dwarves from the great mountains of the south. Their thick bearded faces all smiles and hospitality as they plied their wares to travellers and locals alike. Unfortunately, it seems their water filtration techniques left something to be desired, and unbeknownst to me, I swallowed something alongside my refreshing beverage. I first noticed the problem when my throat began to itch most unnaturally. Now, given my extensive travels, I'm no stranger to questionable street food and the havoc it can wreak upon one's digestive system. I expected this irritation to pass, or at worst to result in some unfortunate stomach distress later in the evening. However, the sensation in my throat did not subside, it worsened. My words grew hoarse, my breathing slightly more laboured, and I felt a distinct, wriggling presence within moments. A dawning horror overtook me as I realised something was alive in my throat. I had, of course, read about throat leeches, nasty little things resembling harmless twigs floating in fresh water until some unsuspecting fool swallows one. The creature, now nestled against the soft tissue at the back of my throat, had latched on and was beginning to feast. Each second passing brought it a sickening awareness that my life might soon become significantly shorter unless immediate action was taken. I made the universal gesture for distress, clutching at my throat, my eyes bulging slightly as I tried to dislodge the parasite with sheer force of will, which, let me tell you, is profoundly ineffective. Assuming I had simply swallowed a date pit, a kindly merchant woman clapped me on the back in a well-meaning but entirely ineffective attempt to assist. This, unfortunately, also only seemed to aggravate the situation, and I became acutely aware of my dwindling air supply. Now, according to well-documented, albeit grisly research, a throat leech will gorge itself on its host's blood, draining it at a rate of up to 3 drops per second. This might not sound like much, but when it's latched onto your windpipe, you become extremely invested in those drops. More concerningly, the little monster is indiscriminate about placement, meaning it can shift unexpectedly, causing the host to choke. A delightful feature that increases damage and in many cases leads to rather undignified demise. Desperate, I staggered towards a leatherworker's stall, where a man was busy twisting lengths of thin metal wire into elaborate filigree. With my limited communication ability, I pointed frantically at my throat, then at the wire, and made what I hoped was a compelling case, though through my rapidly darkening vision. To his credit, the craftsman quickly deduced the problem, though I suspected my convulsions were a clue. Heating the wire over a nearby brazier, he steeled himself and, with no small amount of trepidation, attempted to insert the makeshift medical instrument. Now, the only documented non-magical means of removing a throat leech is to pierce it with a heated wire. If done correctly, the leech bursts and the victim is, if not unharmed, at least no longer being actively murdered from within. If done incorrectly, however, the would-be surgeon is likely to scorch the patient's esophagus instead. The chance of success is a meagre 5% per point of dexterity possessed by the person making the attempt, which, if I may say, is most unfair mathematical equation when one's life is on the line. By some miracle, or sheer dumb luck, the wire found its mark and the leech burst with an audible pop, and I was left doubled over in a mixture of relief, residual choking, and the most unpleasant aftertaste. The leatherworker, looking slightly green himself, patted me on the back in what I assume was meant to be encouragement, though I believe it was more to reassure himself that I was not about to expire in his shop. Now, if one were to translate the Scarcely experience into modern adventuring terms, the throat leech presents an interesting conundrum for game designers. In its original form, its presence depended entirely on a random chance of ingestion, followed by a slow, dreadful realization that something had gone wrong. older editions, it was represented with a simple AC of 10, a single hit point, and an unassuming attack that dealt 1 to 3 damage while steadily draining the character's life force. The real danger, however, came from its ability to choke a victim. If you choked 3 rounds in a row, you died. No saves, no second chances, just immediate tragic expiration. For modern adventurers, a more fitting approach might be to treat the throat leech less as a conventional monster and more akin to a trap or an environmental hazard. After all, the creature does not attack so much as it's an unwitting consumed. So a dungeon master could employ a constitution saving throw to determine whether the leech latches onto a victim's throat, with progressively more difficult saves required to remove it. The failure could mean steadily increasing damage each round, and of course the infamous choking mechanic could be reintroduced, requiring a death saving throw instead of outright, 3 strikes you're dead rule of old. Alternatively, it could be treated as a wondrous toxin, or a magical or mundane affliction that requires specific knowledge or tools to remove. A skilled healer might recognize the symptoms and apply a dexterity-based medicine check to remove it without harming the victim. Magically, a lesser restoration spell or similar magic might neutralize the threat instantly, making clerics and druids indispensable, of course, when traveling in regions where throat leeches are known to lurk. Regardless of how one chooses to implement them, the core of the throat leech's horror remains unchanged, an unseen menace lurking in the most innocuous of places, waiting for unsuspecting adventurers to take a sip of doom. And as someone who's had first-hand experience with such an encounter, let me assure you, always filter your water. Always. And if you must drink from an unfamiliar source, be sure to travel with dexterous friends and a piece of heated wire, just in case. Now, for those of you who stuck around for the deep ecology on these critters, go grab yourself a tasty beverage. We're about to get deeply nerdy. Throat leeches are hermaphrodites capable of reproducing autonomously or through mating. They undergo a complex reproductive cycle that involves both waterborne and parasitic stages, and at the egg stage they are gelatinous, roughly the size of the fish roe, and laid in stagnant brackish water or inside damp, decomposing organic matter, including corpses. The eggs hatch within a few days if conditions are sufficiently warm and humid. They are then at the larval stage, and these young leeches resemble translucent worms no larger than a grain of rice. At this stage, they are non-parasitic filter feeders, consuming microscopic organic material in the water over several days of rapid growth into the juvenile stage. They'll also do this in the swill in the bottom of a torso of a corpse. The juvenile leeches develop their proboscis and begin actively seeking hosts at this stage. They are drawn to warm-blooded creatures, particularly those that drink or breathe through the water. Once attached, they switch to their parasitic adulthood stage. Once inside a host, a throat leech takes several weeks to fully mature. If not removed, it can live for several months within a host, feeding and slowly growing. If the host dies, the leech may emerge and seek another, or it can attempt to lay eggs in a damp location, restarting the cycle. In the ideal environment, namely warm swamps, the throat leeches are ambush parasites, utilizing their small size and nearly invisible form in water to latch onto unsuspecting victims. They are primarily found in the stagnant pools, swamps, or marshes rich in decomposing organic material, particularly those in the Forgotten Realms, less so in the far north and Sword Coast, but Schult in the southern coast, the deltas of the Old World, and the far eastern reaches of the Sea of Fallen Stars, certainly. Caverns with underground water sources, particularly those with natural warmth, and any sheltered ruins, dungeons, and crypts, where damp conditions foster all sorts of life that prefers to stay out of the sunlight. The primary method of infection is through ingestion or accidental inhalation, as mentioned, so travellers who drink unfiltered water from contaminated sources may unknowingly introduce throat leeches into their system, just like I did. Similarly, those wading through infested waters with open wounds may find a juvenile leech attempting to burrow in. Be thankful it's not an actual rock grub doing that. You might have seconds to live if you don't cut the thing out of your veins before it starts eating your heart while it's still beating. Once inside a host, the throat leech also moves swiftly, but not as violently. It attaches to the soft tissue at the back of the upper trachea, secreting a numbing agent that prevents immediate detection. The same secretion causes swelling and excessive mucus production, leading to slow, suffocating death if left untreated in smaller animals, but most humanoids can survive it most of the time. Still, the presence of the throat leech is a death sentence without medical or magical intervention eventually. The creature does not kill immediately, but rather introduces progressive respiratory distress, making it a particularly cruel and slow death with a lot of unfortunate social stigma amongst marsh folk, who would rather die with a stab with a hot needle rather than have a filthy throat leech in their throat. Within the first few hours, the victim suffers slight throat irritation, often mistaken for a mild cold or a dry air irritation. After leaving a humid area, there will be a lot of minor difficulty swallowing, and if it's something like is caught in the throat, this is accompanied by a faint, unpleasant taste in the mouth, often metallic from minor blood loss. And after several hours, the symptoms worsen to include shortness of breath and increasing mucus production, a raspy, wheezing voice, or inability to speak loudly, followed by a gradual feeling of suffocation, particularly while lying down. And in the unlikely case that's not detected within 24 to 48 hours, the victim will start to suffer critical symptoms of gasping for air due to the severe airway obstruction. The parasite's growth will result in unconsciousness and eventual asphyxiation and death if untreated. In rare cases, some victims have survived longer, especially if the leech is small or the host has a robust constitution. However, over time, the leech grows more extensive and more entrenched, making removal increasingly tricky, and even among average adult humanoids, they will not survive for long. It makes me parched just thinking about it. Cheers, everyone. As always, thanks for listening, and as always, I'll be back with more for you very soon.